Today, I have a special treat for you. We are going to be talking about everyone's favorite topic, numbers and data. And I'm chuckling to myself a little bit because you're probably thinking, I don't really like data, so why are we going to be talking about it? But the reality is that data is the backbone of every business out there. And that's no exception for online business or for those of us who are creating and selling digital products online. But unfortunately, data doesn't always come easy to a lot of us. And that's why I invited on a very good friend of mine who has been there from the very beginning of my blogging journey. Her name is Jennifer Grayeb, and she is the CEO of the Nimble Co., a consulting group focused on helping online business owners better understand their numbers so they can make data-driven and profit-generating marketing decisions. She recently left her senior strategy role at a Fortune 5 company where she had 6 roles in just 7 years. While in that role, in just 2 years, she built a productivity blog that reached over 2 million page views per year, which she went on to sell. In every role she's had or every company she's owned, one thing has been consistent. She delivers results without working 80-hour weeks. Now she helps others do the same with one of her best kept secrets, data. And what I think you're going to love about our conversation is that she does a great job at breaking down why you need to understand your data and where you can actually find the data that matters for your business while you're selling digital products. So let me bring on my good friend, Jennifer. You are listening to the Empowered Business Podcast. I'm your host, Monica Froese, a mom of 2 and your secret weapon to creating a 6-figure digital product business. I'm on a mission to help 1,000 women make $100,000 a year. That's right, $100 million towards financial independence for women. As an online business expert, I am teaching you everything I know right here week after week, so you can join us on the journey to $100 million. Sound good? Then let's jump in. Jennifer, welcome to the Empowered Business Podcast. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. I'm so excited that we finally get to talk on the podcast. I think it's funny. I always like to give context about my guests because most of the guests so far I've known fairly well. And you were in my first peer mastermind in the online business world, which is kind of crazy. Feels like then we've known each other like a lifetime pretty much.
Yeah.
I just think that's funny. So for context, Jennifer and I literally have known each other since the beginning of our businesses. So we know a lot about each other and it's been an interesting journey. So with that being said, why don't you tell everyone how you got started on this entrepreneurial journey and what your business is and what you do now?
Yeah. So I actually started, and I'm going to try to give a really streamlined version of this story because Monica knows that there have been a ton of things that have happened in this journey for me. But I started back in 2009 as a fitness blogger. I co-founded one of the first influencer networks when I realized that there was such a big gap between bloggers and brands and how they partnered and worked together. I actually found through co-founding that company that I really had a specialty in online community management. So I ended up going and doing some consulting for monster.com to help them with some community building. And then I went on to the YEC, which was a young entrepreneurship council, where I served as their community manager for quite some time. So I really kind of got the entrepreneur itch even more in that role because I was working with these huge name entrepreneurs who now are like celebrities in our world, but back then we're just getting started. And so it really just fed that side of me. But I also had just gotten married. I really wanted to have kids and I was working around the clock. So I decided to kind of take a pause and go into corporate and, kind of like float one of the nice cubicle jobs, have a couple kids and then leave. I had no intention of staying long-term. I had no intention of trying to climb the corporate ladder. I just wanted good benefits and a steady paycheck and a 9-to-5. Well, I somehow accidentally ended up in HR. That's a whole long story. During the time I was in corporate, and this is when Monica and I started really becoming friends, is I had started another blog. My itch came back. I'm constantly cycling through wanting to be an entrepreneur whenever I'm not. So itch came back. I started another blog. Monica was a blogger at the time. So we became friends through that, started our mastermind. I ended up going on to sell that blog and business to a large company, kind of resumed focus in my corporate position, and then itch came back again. And I left the corporate job and started helping other online business owners with their operations, because at this point I had so much experience in the back end of business. So in doing that, I was helping all these people and realized that they had such a gap in their data. Like, they were making decisions and I would be trying to understand where the decision was coming from or how I can influence the decision, but there was no data to back up what they were doing. And so when I felt like they were doing the wrong thing, for example, because I am a very opinionated person.
No.
Yeah. So when I felt like they were doing the wrong thing, I'm like, I need a way to be able to quantify this to show them that they're wrong, right? Like the ultimate brat I am. So I started really digging into Google Analytics. From there, just got techier and techier and realized that as I started building custom dashboards for my operations clients. And I realized that there was such a gap and such a need for this in this space. And so over time, I started shifting away from operations and focusing solely in data analytics and measurement, specifically around marketing and sales. So that's the summary of how I got to where I am.
So in other words, you have a lot of different experiences and your journey is very fascinating. I have so many questions I could ask right now, but I think first of all, what I want to say is I would say a decent amount of the audience listening has probably been a student of mine at some point, unless you're brand new here. Either way, welcome. But people who've been following me for any amount of time know that I love data. But here's the differentiation. I'm really good at intaking data. So I can look at, let's just say like when I'm running ads, I can look and say immediately on different data points and be like, okay, so this is where I should start problem shooting because this number is too low. And it's very easy for me to ingest data. What Jennifer does to dumb it down is there's so much data out there and there's so many ways to collect data that the issue is it's really hard to get a holistic view of what's going on in your business and like aggregating that information. And to this day, I've never had a really great way to do it. It's kind of like piecemeal. And it's a lot of work when it's piecemeal, then you miss things. So actually, as we're speaking, I'm going to be signing a contract for Jennifer to get me a dashboard finally. So just know that everything, when we talk about data, nobody's perfect. Fortune 100 companies are not perfect with data. I've seen you over the last few years find your sweet spot, making data accessible to people who otherwise wouldn't have it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. Like when I was in corporate, and it's funny because my background's HR in the corporate side of things. And so people think of HR to have nothing to do with data, but actually over the past like 5 years or so, people analytics have become a huge focus in these large organizations. And so I consulted with internally top executives, right? People making decisions for Fortune 10 size company, and they don't have time to be sifting through piles and piles of data. And also they tend to struggle with the super analytical people who are gathering the data, right? So I found a sweet spot. I always joke, and this is probably not a nice way to phrase it, but I'm the nerd translator. Like I am so good, at least in corporate, I would work with the data analytics team, get all the data, and then how do I then take that, synthesize it down to what the executive actually needs to know to make a decision, visualize it so they can look at that and make a decision in 30 seconds or less, and then give it to them. And so my goal was to try to bring that here into the online business space, because we're using multiple tools. We're selling on different platforms. We're running ads on different things. We're marketing on different channels. And you're right. There's no one size fits all centralized solution to be able to see everything, right? Most entrepreneurs are waking up in the morning and checking 5 different platforms to see how they're doing versus
Absolutely.
I wake up in the morning and I pull up my dashboard on my phone and I know exactly how much I've made to the penny this month, broken down by product, broken down by source, even more detailed than QuickBooks because they can't break it down that way. So that is really like what I've loved to be able to do for people, is to help them not get so overwhelmed by data and exactly make it accessible and make it easy for them to be more strategic by leveraging data in their business.
So I can't even imagine the day when I can look at one thing, which hopefully I will have after working with Jennifer. And because I can, like I said, I can ingest the data very easily. I can look at data points and be like, okay, I know it's go time. I know exactly what I need to change based on the data I'm looking at, but you're exactly right. I have to pull data from a myriad of different platforms, not only from where I host my sales and landing pages, but where people check out, which in my business is still 4 different places based on the funnel, which is actually very common because as you evolve as a business owner, you're trying different solutions, and funnel-based checkouts are different than shop-based checkouts. And oftentimes you have a need for both. I mean, it's actually, in a way, it's kind of like, why is it this way? But it just is because this is tech. This is how tech is. I try to explain this to my students. It's really hard because people who come into the online business world, they want one tool to do everything. And I was in tech for 11 years prior to being an entrepreneur. And my husband's still in tech. So we laugh because we're like, there's no such thing as an all-in-one platform. A company is really great at one thing typically, sometimes two, but usually a software company specializes in one thing. And that's not going to cover all the aspects of your business. You end up with multiple tools pieced together, but how they talk to each other and the data they transfer between each other isn't always a clean, smooth thing. It just isn't. And so having someone like you to connect those dots for people like me who just want the data available, like you're talking about your executives, I'm like, I am that person. I just want to sit in a boardroom, give me the data so I can make a decision, but I don't want to collect it. I want someone or something else to do it. When you're listening to this, do not underestimate how important what she does is, which we'll talk more about. But I'm jumping a little bit because there was something you said in your intro that I also want to touch on, because I have a lot of people in this audience that are bloggers. Like you said, we met because you had a website, which was like a productivity website, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we were both heavily like pushing out blog posts back then. And it was a very typical blogger type model, leading with free content creation. Why did you decide to sell?
Wow. That's definitely a surprising question. So there was a couple things. One, personally in my life, I had Lyme disease at the time. So I was really struggling physically. And so to be dealing with that, I actually had to take a disability leave from work for 5 weeks. I was, a mom of 2 at this point, a very demanding full-time corporate job in a very senior role, and running this business. So adding in getting sick was just like the straw that broke the camel's back. But what I will say is that part of the reason was because it was so much work to lead with all free content. Like I was just constantly having to create nonstop. And it kind of also felt like when you're promoting only free content, it felt like, and you remember this because like we were dealing with the algorithm change, right? Like you'd finally hit a smooth spot with like Pinterest or Facebook or Google. And then all of a sudden an algorithm change slams down and your income's cut in half. Or remember the year Amazon changed our affiliate commissions and that was like gutting. They dropped us from like 8% to 4% and it was brutal. So it just kind of felt like I was like running 100 miles an hour, but never getting anywhere. And the biggest like advantage to that business was when I started introducing digital products. And that was, I think, probably influenced by you because you had just started doing that with some of your courses. And I was like, well, I need something, even just like eBooks and getting started with like mini courses and then eventually a bigger course. That was what kind of made the work start to be worth it. But then again, with me getting sick and having all these other things on my plate, plus if you couldn't tell from my story, I love change. So it's easy for me to just quickly be like, I'll just start something new. The opportunity presented itself. So I went for it.
Okay, let me ask you this then. If you were going to get back into having a blog again, what would you do differently in the landscape that you see now in online marketing?
Ooh, good question. So I would not be as focused on pushing out a million different things. Like for me, it would be very strategic. It would be about funneling them to what I want them to do. And then the pieces of content I would create would also be really acquisition focused. So for example, if I thought like, I see so much data, so I'm struggling to answer this question in a way that makes sense. But like, I see so much data about people who push out content everywhere. And there's always a leading source of traffic for certain pieces of content, certain topics, et cetera. And so I think I would be really strategic about that and knowing like when I'm creating this content, not only who is it for, but where am I going to be promoting this and what kind of content works really well on that platform so that every action step I'm taking is strategic from the point of getting them to get to the blog post. And then what do I want them to do from that content to something that's actually a little bit more profitable, right? Which would be getting them on my email list, getting them into a digital product or a digital program.
We think very similar. This is literally how I teach in my course. I actually just did a free challenge where it was a lot of people who were like new to the online landscape. And the number one question I got in this challenge
sometimes it's so frustrating to articulate this because it's like, wait, no, you're asking the wrong question. I kept repeating myself, you're asking the wrong question, because what they were asking me was, well, okay, if I create a digital product and then I set it up with the sales mechanism, the sales funnel to sell it, how do I get people to it? I said, you're still asking the wrong question, because everyone wanted to know how to get the traffic. And I kept saying, we don't care about the traffic until we understand what the end point is.
Yes.
And back when we were blogging, the end point was like a moving target. It was like, well, maybe we'll get some display ad income, or like you said, let's send them to Amazon affiliates. And the reality was we were pushing out a lot of free content, and it served like a lot of different, not very profitable purposes. And so it didn't keep our content like honed in and always driving towards a main call to action. And so every time someone's like, well, how do I get people there? You're asking the wrong question, because first you have to identify what you want them to do when they're there and work backwards. I compared it to like getting a college degree. You know, at the end of the 4 years, you're going to graduate, right? Isn't that the first thing you know is you're going to graduate? The whole point of being here is to get a degree. That's the end point. Then you work back, and in freshman year, you take your gen eds. And then you take your intro to your major, and then maybe you'll add on a minor in your junior year. And that's the reality. You work backwards, moving, same thing. The end result is on X date, I'm going to be in the new house. Okay, well, what has to happen to get me that? Well, now I got to get a real estate agent. Then I got to put my existing house up for sale. You always start with the endpoint in mind. But for some weird reason in the blogging model, it was not taught that way for many, many years. It was just like, put out free content. And that was it. It was like a dot, a period at the end of that.
Well, and it's still not. And I also think like sometimes people need to put a little bit of the blinders on. Like when someone looks at a business owner that's ahead of you, you're not seeing what's behind the scenes. So like, let's say Monica's like, oh, I'll use myself as an example. I post blog posts every week. Some weeks we have 2 pieces of content that come out, right? But like Monica said, 1, we are very strategic and intentional about the content that we're putting out. I am paying someone else to SEO optimize that, to acquire new traffic from Google or other platforms. We are creating things based on data, based on where people are coming from. And I have a team, right? So it's not just me throwing out random content like I would have done in 2009 or 2013, right? Where it was just like, put as much out as you can. And the more you put out, the more chances of you have of people coming to your website and you getting that like 0.001 cent for their view, right? Now it's like, yes, maybe even when we have content that people are like we just did a post that was about like best morning routines. And at first it like, I could see someone coming and being like, oh, Jen's just trying to acquire any traffic she can. It's like, no, when you actually read that blog post, we talk about the importance of data, like having a data review in your morning routine, because, oh, guess what? When I wake up in the morning, that is the first thing I do. I check my data before I brush my teeth. Like, no, I know I'm next level, but like that is what I do.
Back in the day when we were bloggers, and I say that in quotations because I have a whole episode before this that was about how I hate the term blogger and we're actually content creators, but you can go back to episode 12 if you want to hear that rant. Every morning we used to check our Google Analytics, but not to see how much money we made. We were checking it to see how many people were on our site. Backwards. Yep. Backwards. Do you care how many people are on your site, or do you care how much money you made while you were sleeping? I personally would rather see how much money I was making while I was sleeping.
100%. And I get in this fight with clients. I'm like a difficult person to work with, and I'm not worried about working with you because we're so similar. But like a lot of times clients will come to me and they're like, great, we're going to measure how many Instagram followers I have and like how that's growing. And I'm like, no, we're not. And if you think we're going to, I'll give you your money back, because that's not the kind of data that I look at. I'm happy to tell you how much money you're making from your Instagram activities. I'm happy to tell you which of your stories or which of your posts resulted in getting people on your email list or making a purchase. But if you just want to measure how many people follow you on Instagram, you should go invest in a $79 a month tool and not in a data analyst, because this is not what you need. Like, I focus on helping people figure out what of their marketing activities are getting them results, because I spent many, many years, just like you, back in the day, spinning my wheels and churning out stuff that was not strategic, when I could have, if I had just been, and I will say that you and I were a little bit more data driven back then than the average blogger, but even using us, right? Like, we both really doubled down on Pinterest back then. And I mean, my blog was 2 million page views a year. And I think 80% of our traffic was coming from Pinterest. So we were looking at that, seeing where people were coming from, and then pushing out more content to those platforms. But most business owners are not thinking that way. And I don't know if it's the blogging edge that helps us with this, But like, I'll get behind a 7-figure business owner and I'm like, great, where are most of your sales coming from? They're like, my cart tool. And I'm like, no, like where? How are people getting to your cart tool? Like, how are they buying? And they're like, oh, I don't know, but I market everywhere. Well, if you're spending money on a Pinterest person and money on an Instagram person and money on your YouTube person and you're doing all these things, how do you know which of those activities is actually selling your products? And they're like, oh, wow, we don't know that. I just pay them all.
Which is crazy when you think about it. Like, even I'm very fascinated to see when you build me my dashboard, if I'm correct, because I know where to go to get the information. So I think I understand, but I'm curious if I'm missing something because again, I don't have the information properly aggregated to make it as clear as you make it. So, okay, so this gets into a really good data conversation that I think, and I get that the word data is intimidating to a lot of people. Like me and you happen to like numbers a lot. And I understand that a lot of people do not. So let's talk like as if we're talking to those types of people, because I think that's probably predominantly who's listening right now. So someone is getting going with selling their digital products and they're making some money right now. And they, like everyone else, has the buzzword out there, I want to scale. I want to make lots of money as I sleep. And they come to you and they're like, they want your help. And you're like, here's the thing. You take on clients, but let's say that they're just not there to be able to afford like a one-on-one service.
Yeah.
And they want to like DIY it. Where do you even start? Like, where should we be starting as a digital product creator of any, like whether it's a course, a group program? I mean, because in essence, it's kind of all the same. Where do they start? What should they be tracking?
Absolutely. So first, I'm going to start with even like the question before your question, which is like, they need Google Analytics. Okay. So
that's a good one. Thank you.
Like every platform, all these individual platforms have their own tracking mechanism. I like to centralize it all. So I would say you need Google Analytics installed on your website first and foremost. Since most people listening probably are digital product creators, which is what everybody should be doing. So they are working with a cart tool, right? Or a funnel tool. What you want to do is do a Google search and look up, like, let's say you're working with Thrivecart, Google Analytics, e-commerce. People do not realize how easy it is to get the revenue, like the actual sales data from your cart tool into Google Analytics. So first and foremost, install Google Analytics on your site, do a Google search of your cart tool and e-commerce with Google Analytics. Because I would say at least 50% of the cart tools on the market, it's just a matter of toggling on one setting in Google Analytics and putting your ID property in the right spot in that tool. And it's all going to flow in beautifully and easy. It's not going to be perfect, but you and I talked before this about attribution and how impossible it is to make anything 100%, but it's going to give you a ton of insight into where your sales are coming from. And then next, in terms of what to focus on, it's that for me, as someone that's behind the scenes in a lot of digital marketing companies, I'm looking at what sources of traffic are getting leads or sales. And so there's a report in Google Analytics called the Source Medium Report. It's in the acquisition section under all traffic, I believe. That report will tell you almost everything you need to know for a product-based business owner. You're going to see where your traffic's coming from, how long they're on the site, which I think is an important metric. I know that that's kind of a one people debate on, but when you're looking at sales pages, to me, it's very indicative of how like sticky your content is and how long people are staying on the page. And you're also going to be able to see that e-commerce information so you can know if they actually went on to become a leader of sale. So that's honestly like, if you do nothing else, it's understanding first and foremost where your traffic is coming from and then which of those traffic sources are actually creating those leads and sales. Because I will tell you, I'm behind the scenes in a lot of big numbers, and it's not always your top source of traffic that's your top source of revenue or sales.
So I find that the complicated part, like I know how to go into Google Analytics and find out where my traffic's coming from. I know if it's coming from my email list, if it's Pinterest, Facebook. I even am as far as understanding if it's coming from Facebook ads, because we use these cool things called UTM codes, which Jennifer also has a whole product on.
Yep.
And you should buy it if you don't know what I'm talking about, because it will change your life. And we'll link to all of this in the show notes. But the one thing that I find is the sticky point once you start getting going. So you get your Google Analytics, you hook it up to your e-commerce cart. So like in my Google Analytics, I see all of my Thrivecart data. That's predominantly what we use for checkout at this point. We see all of that data come in, like we just did a big launch. And so Google Analytics, we'd log in and been like, it was like, your week is insanely, like 500% over last week. I'm like, well, yes, it better be because we're launching. So I have all that, but where it breaks down, and I think where a lot of people who don't like numbers don't realize it's breaking down, is to your point of you can see where people are coming from, but understanding where they're converting from is very difficult. And this is where this concept of attribution comes in. So I first ran into this with Google Analytics because I wanted to set up goals. And goals I thought were going to be a very straightforward thing in Google Analytics. And you're probably like, yeah, you're wrong. Yeah, I was wrong. What I found out, and the whole reason I wanted to set up goals, this was my whole purpose. Okay, I want to see if the sales coming from a Facebook ad, what campaign, what ad set, what ad. Same thing with Pinterest. And then I was like, then I got going on Instagram. So I wanted to see that. And what was happening was my goals were not attributing to those platforms. They were attributing to lead pages where my sales page is hosted, or it was attributing to my checkout cart at the time, which was Sendout. And I'm like, wait a minute, but that wasn't their entry point. Their entry point had to be somewhere else. Was it my email? Was it Facebook? Where was it? And I'm like, why isn't it attributing to the original source? That is very difficult to figure out.
It is. This is the whole reason that I have service-based business right now, because it's actually, I mean, if you are someone that's comfortable with tech, like if what we've talked about so far has not scared you at all, if you Google what's called cross-domain tracking, that is the solution to what Monica just described. And let me explain to you why Google does it, because I think people don't understand why that's happening. I get a lot of people that will show me their source medium report and PayPal's in it. PayPal is not sending any one of us traffic, okay?
Yeah.
Like, PayPal does not care about your business. They care about making money. But what happens is, like, think about it from Google's perspective. Google sees that you click over from Facebook. They see that you go to the sales page. They see that you click initiate purchase. They see that you click on PayPal. But now you're leaving the website and you're technically going to PayPal to complete a transaction. So Google's moved on from you, right? Like, they're over you. And all of a sudden, you're getting sent back to the website for the thank you page. And Google's like, hey, look, we have someone new coming from PayPal. And you lose the fact that that sale actually came from Facebook. So it's called cross-domain tracking. It is a little bit more technical, but that is what you need to set up in order to avoid that from happening if your user changes URL at any point in the journey. So like with your website, for example, they probably go from your domain to like yourdomain.thrivecart.com to check out, and then they're sent back to your domain, or they're still on a ThriveCart thank you. And that's where that breakdown can happen. But yeah, I mean, you do start to like, you can't trust exactly what's in there out of the box. I say start there for most people because it's more than what they're currently looking at, right? Like, it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be a ton of direct none traffic, and you're going to be like, oh, these people had it bookmarked. No, 20,000 people did not have your site bookmarked, right? Like, that just means Google didn't know where they were coming from. But you're getting some indication. And the more you get in the habit of, what I like to say with data is like, the more you get in the habit of looking at it, even if you don't really know what you're looking at, you're going to start having questions. Even if, like, everyone who comes to me and says, I'm not a numbers person, I'm not a data person, I won't know what I'm looking at, I have never actually had anybody look at data and then not have a follow-up question. And that is where the gold is, because even when I'm talking about this source medium report, and let's assume for a minute that you don't have the cross-domain problem, if it says that Facebook is your biggest source of traffic, like you said about the UTMs, well, Facebook could have a million ways to send you traffic. Was it a Facebook story? Was it a post? Was it a post on your profile? Was it a post in a group? If it was a post in a group, which group was it? Which post in which group was it? Like, was it an ad? Which ad was it? Which campaign? Like, which ad set? There's so many, like, just knowing it's from Facebook is kind of useless because you might be investing 49 different ways in Facebook. So being able to drill that down, also understanding which pieces of content, like what was it on Facebook, not just where specifically on Facebook, but like, was it that you were directly promoting your sales page, or were you directly promoting a piece of content that had a banner in it for your digital product? And that's how they got to the sales page and bought, right? So it's like what you're saying, it's like starting with the end in mind and then slowly backing out of it. But I think people feel like they need to, like, they're probably listening going, oh, well, I wouldn't have thought to do that. So how would I? No, you don't. It's normal that you don't think to do that. You look at the data and then you will have questions, and that's going to be what makes you think to do that. But most people's barrier to entry is that they're just not looking at the data because they think they won't know what to do.
And the next barrier to entry is expecting perfection. We had a saying in the Fortune 100 company I worked for, which means I was working for one of the top publicly traded companies in the United States. Like, so like, if anyone's going to get their data right, the people reporting to Wall Street better, right? But yet we still had a saying, very popular in the company. It was called junk in, junk out. So in other words, year over year, same junk data, as long as you're measuring it the same way, junk in, junk out, because the reality was no company has perfect data, not even the richest companies on the planet. And I think new entrepreneurs have a very hard time grasping this, that there is no such thing as perfection. So, you know, like one of the things when I was talking about like how I go into like multiple different tools, because talking about specifically all the different ways you could be getting traffic from Facebook. Well, if I'm spending $10,000 a month on Facebook ads, which is a very average budget for me, like I could expect to spend that this month in Facebook ads. I leverage Facebook's actual reporting a lot because I need a better idea of how those ads down through the actual ad creative and pictures that are being shown. But the thing is that even that's not perfect because Facebook wants to take credit for as much as it can. And that's we could have a whole podcast on attribution windows, which we won't do right now. But the reality is, even as someone who understands data as well as I do, I understand that I'm seeing what Facebook wants me to see in reality. And so trying to aggregate this information through Google Analytics can only make my business stronger, which is why you're like my next step. You've been my next step for like 1.5 years, but you know, sometimes I just kind of want to I want to put my head in the sand about data sometimes and be like, let's just deal with what we have. The reality is, I know it sounds scary, but you can't do this magical thing people talk about called scaling, which is still a bad word. You can't do it with no numbers. There's no such thing. And so even if it makes you uncomfortable, like that's just one of those mindset blocks where you have to break through if you want your business to be successsul. Wouldn't 100%. You like in a nutshell?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like I majored in economics or statistics or geometry, or I don't even know all the math terms, because if you had asked me, like, I probably have corporate mentors that would laugh if they knew I had a business based on numbers, right? Like I love numbers and I've always been, I would say like, business-wise, more of a numbers person. In life, I never considered myself a numbers person. I majored in English literature. I worked in HR. I count with my fingers. Like if you try to be like my 7-year-old is better at quick math than I am. Okay. But I am a ninja in Excel. Like you want Excel to do that math for you. Like I'm your girl, you know? So I think like you just need to give yourself more credit. If you're listening to this, you are creating something out of nothing, like literally nothing. And I think because we're in this world of people that are making $1 million overnight, and we're always feeling like we're imposters or we're not doing enough or we're not making enough, I think we lose sight of how incredible it is that we've built these businesses from nothing, like nothing. And so stop doubting yourself. Like you can do this. It's not hard. You just need to trust yourself and your ability to look at numbers and be open to asking questions. And that's all it comes down to.
Yeah, you need a healthy dose of curiosity is what I like to say. My MBA, my master's in business, is actually in finance and marketing, which is hilarious. I was the girl in undergrad who did poli-sci. I was going to go to law school. That was actually my path. And then I had some stuff happen in my family and it didn't end up being my path. So I was in my corporate job. I got my master's. Funny enough, because I didn't have the undergrad accounting classes and everything, luckily I'm pretty good with numbers, but I will never forget, I took a summer class. It was corporate finance. That professor would probably laugh if he knew what I did for a living now, because there's these financial calculators that I swear to you, 2 times 2 is not 4 when you put it in. And I sat in this class, it was like a 601 class. So, I should have had a lot more building blocks before this. And I was so confused. I'm like, this calculator is not a typical calculator. Why isn't 2 times 2 4? And I was like freaking out. He probably thought I was dumb. And I finally had to go up to him and be like, listen, I didn't take this in undergrad. And you're speaking such a foreign language. When you're teaching, I need you to say on your calculator, hit these buttons. And I'm like, I might be the only one that needs this, but you need to do this for me because I need to pass this class. Because I had a 4.0 getting my MBA and he wasn't going to ruin it. And, it's funny because like, if I hadn't gone up there and asked for him to dumb it down to show me on his calculator what he was hitting, I probably would have not only ruined my 4.0, but who knows if I would have passed that class. Same thing when you own your business. Ask questions, get to know the person, like how I know Jennifer and she's really good at this. And I ask her questions. You ask questions, a healthy dose of curiosity. There's nothing wrong with admitting you don't know. Ask.
100%. I'll tell you, when I was in corporate, I worked for Fortune 100 like you did. And so we had these annual investor calls, right? They were actually quarterly investor meetings. And one of my mentors, like when I first started in HR, he was talking about something finance related. And I said, no, I am not a numbers person, right? Like the sentence we all love to say, I'm not a numbers person. He said, you need to be a numbers person because numbers are the language of business. So you think you understand the business that we are in. I want you to listen to the investor call and tell me how well you understand our business. I said, fine. So I sat in and I listened to the investor call and I realized they from after the CEO gave his welcome and the niceties, and then they jumped in, I realized I knew nothing about our business. It was like they were speaking another language. And so I showed up to every single one of those calls for the 7 years I was with that company. I would invite executives to come listen with me. People who know more than you love to talk about what they know about. So I would ask them, hey, can I sit in your office with you when you listen to this call so I can ask you questions? And I would ask questions. And then when I moved on to manage a team, I did the same thing. My team and I would invite executives to come in and sit with us. We would ask them questions. Oh, what were you thinking when they said this? What were you saying when you said this? And I don't work for this company anymore, but I guarantee you, if I got on one of those calls right now, I would be able to answer those questions for other people, because it just sometimes takes time and exposure and curiosity. And that's it. There's no magic pill here. It's just, you've got to just take the time and get curious and put yourself in front of it.
That reminds me of when Pinterest went public and I read their whole public filing. It was 180 pages. Oh yeah, I
remember that.
And I distilled it down into maybe a 7,000, 10,000 word blog post. But what was really telling from that was when you go public, the company has to tell a lot about what's going on behind the scenes. And Pinterest literally laid out the roadmap of what they were doing with the product. And all these things that people were saying in Facebook groups and all these assumptions that were being made, I'm like, that's not what Pinterest is doing. And that's not what that means. And they're like, well, how do you know? I read it. Yeah. I was selling a Pinterest course on their advertising. And the only way, if you're going public, the only way they were making money was through advertising. I'm teaching people advertising. So they're going to put in that report what they're doing in terms of advertising. So if I'm going to be a good teacher, I should read it. So I did. And then I was like, oh man, no one knows what they're talking about in these Facebook groups at all. And it just solidified that I had a healthy dose of curiosity about the thing that I was helping other people on. And no one else thought to do that. Not a single person thought to do that that I know of, to read the report, because they thought that's not something we do in marketing. Well, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. So yeah, oh my gosh, I could talk to you forever. Now I hear my kids starting to come up because we've gone over. If you guys can hear my 3-year-old crying, I apologize, but this is the world of podcasting when you have children. Okay, so can you tell us, for all of us who have that healthy dose of curiosity now about data, and I know you have some really great entry-level products, can you tell us how we can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's thenimbleco.com, and Monica can link everything in the show notes. But we have a shop on the site. We have courses that will teach you if you wanted to go a little bit deeper and learn some of the techier things that we talked about. We also have complete DIY solutions. If Google Analytics terrifies you and you don't want to be clicking through pages and pages of unknown, I sell dashboards that are just plug and play that connect to your Google Analytics and just synthesize it down to the basics that you need to see to get started. But yeah, even if it's not through me, YouTube, Google, I just want people to understand that this tool is available because it will change your business. So whether it's you're buying something from me or you're consuming my free content or you're just spending time Googling it or searching on YouTube, I highly recommend investing in this skill for yourself.
That's what I love about you. You have such a heart to want to help people. How many people when they're closing on a podcast say, even if it's not for me, go and look at a YouTube video. I mean, honestly, that just goes to show that your heart is truly to help people read their data better and succeed in their business. So thank you so much for joining us. This was such a great episode.
Thanks. This was so fun.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Empowered Business Podcast. Let's stay in touch. I just opened a brand new Facebook group for digital product creators. Whether you are new to digital products or an existing digital product creator, our new Facebook group, Digital Product Insiders, is perfect for you. Head on over to monicafroze.com/group to join for free. See you here again next week.